Remember, you can get in touch with our Fearsome Foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi, I'm Rob Rose, and thanks for joining us on another episode of the Club Dub Football Podcast. This week we're going back into the annals of NFL history, but playing fast and loose with the truth. We're going to take those historic and famous narratives and turn them on their heads for our own team's gain. So what if you could go back to that key moment in the Super Bowl, but have that ball bounce your team's way? Or maybe go back to that all-important historic draft where you end up taking that future Hall of Fame quarterback rather than seeing them end up on the roster of a rival. For all of this chat and misadventure, I'm going to be joined by JB, PB and Aldrin, so let's get on with the show.
Marty! You've got to come back with me!
Where?
Back to the future!
So welcome back, gents.
Hello, Rob.
Another week where the NFL has deliberately kept things quiet so we can just chew the fat and talk about a myriad of other things that would entertain us, if maybe not many people outside of our little circle. This week we're going to be changing those key pieces of NFL history that somehow just stick with us as those moments that if something had have maybe gone slightly different, a ball would have fallen the other way, we could have a very different narrative in the history of our fair league. But before we get to our history-changing choices, Phil, am I throwing over to you for Quiz of the Week?
Welcome to Phil's Quiz of the Week.
On that theme, Rob, on themes of if history had been changed, if things were a little bit different, we're going back to the 2017 NFL Draft for a team-specific Quiz of the Week, maybe with a little bit of a twist first. So, 2017, I'm obviously talking about the famous Mitch Trubisky draft pick trade. They could have Deshaun Watson. They could have Patrick Mahomes. They picked number 2, Mitchell Trubisky. Look how that's worked out for them. So the original second pick of that draft was for the San Francisco 49ers, who traded back one spot with the Chicago Bears for the Bears to pick Mitch Trubisky. Who did the San Francisco 49ers pick?
Solomon Thomas?
Solomon Thomas is correct. Well done. So that's the first part. Next, I'm coming to each of you individually. So let's go in order. Number 13 pick, Rob Rose. Arizona Cardinals were on the clock. Who did they pick? 2017.
Hassan Reddick?
Hassan Reddick is correct. That's 2 for 2. So we scroll a couple more places down to number 15, Indianapolis Colts. You're on the clock, Aldrin. Who did you pick?
Wasn't Darius Leonard, was it? He was
Wasn't
late.
Darius Leonard.
Completely gone out of my head.
Can I attempt to steal?
You can
Go ahead.
Quentin Nelson?
Wrong.
Ryan Kelly?
No, you're just embarrassing yourself now.
No idea. You're going to have to give it, Phil.
He's a safety from Ohio State.
Wasn't like Malik Hooker or...
Malik Hooker. Malik Hooker's right.
So currently looking for a team, Malik Hooker. Oh, no, he signed with the Miami Dolphins this year, didn't he?
Absolutely. And then we go all the way down to pick number 30 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Who did you pick, JB?
It's not who I just wrote down. The Edmonds.
No, he's a Pro Bowler. Anyone wants to steal?
I mean, that could be anybody on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Come on now.
Sure.
Don't remember many Pro Bowlers on offense last year. He's got 2 brothers.
So, TJ Watt?
TJ Watt, number 30 overall.
Oh, see, that's who I wrote down originally, but I thought he was in the 20. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm literally doing TJ on our Zoom call and it didn't help James at
For
all.
the purposes of those listening on Spotify, Rob is doing a T and a J with his hands.
Yes.
And who did Who did the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select, Phil, with their first selection?
Well, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
If you're reading it off the screen, then it doesn't really help.
I am reading it off the screen. So see if any of you can get it then. Or any of our listeners at home. Number 19 overall, tight end.
OJ Howard.
OJ Howard.
See, I can get
That was a waste
several
of a pick,
other
wasn't it?
teams, but
That was a waste of a pick, wasn't it?
I wouldn't say that was any more of a waste of a pick than Malik Hooker.
Well, he was
Or
good.
Mitchell Trubisky, as it were.
Well, yeah. there you
OJ
go.
Howard is a part of our offense.
Wasn't a great first round for selections, was it? Unless you were the Kansas City Chiefs
Or the Cleveland
and the
Browns.
Texans.
I'm sorry. Although I was unable to, I didn't trust my gut with who it was. TJ Watt is an exceptional pick. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, to be fair, if we go through notable first round picks in that draft, Myles Garrett, Jamal Adams, Christian McCaffrey, 8th overall. Here's what you could have won. Patrick Mahomes, 10th overall, Marshawn Lattimore, 11th, Deshaun Watson, 12th, who, you know, is an absolute steal of a pick at 12. Or, if you're listening to this in the future, may not now look like a steal. Marlon Humphrey, Evan Engram, Tre'Davious White.
All right, fair enough. There's a lot of Pro Bowlers in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
Marlon Humphrey, I think, is not quite at the level of the earlier ones as well. I mean,
True, yeah. I mean, it thins out a little bit. Buda Baker, 2nd round. Dalvin Cook, second round.
Isn't that my next question?
I mean,
I was about to tell you that Buda Baker was our 2nd round pick, but never mind.
That was an abridged quiz of the week. I didn't want it to go on as long this week.
Oh, is that what it is? But yeah, Buda Baker, probably the best pick we've made in the last kind of 10 years. You'd maybe argue Kyler Murray, but I mean, if you pick him first overall, then, you know, you've got a half decent chance, haven't you? But for a 2nd round pick, David Johnson in the 3rd round. But yeah, I'd say Buda Baker's our best pick in the last decade.
Here's one for you then for a future podcast, Rob. Are the Arizona Cardinals going to be looking for a new quarterback after this season?
No. Why would we be?
Well, you know, is Kyler Murray the real deal?
Yep. Do you mean Rookie of the Year, Kyler Murray, who followed that up?
Well, what did he do this year?
QB stats. What did he do? He threw the greatest throw in the history of the league.
He threw
a Hail Murray
great touchdown.
I mean, I'd throw back. What's your quarterback done?
I know I'm being facetious.
Then,
well, our quarterback, you know.
Yeah. I mean, most of what your quarterback is for another team as well. So, I mean.
Thanks for listening. That was Phil's quiz of the week.
So, Phil, I mean, it was slightly meandering, but I mean, I like it.
Thank you.
You know, I like it. I like the fact that I got the answer to the question straight away.
Bosh.
I liked, you know, listening to the other guys struggle. I mean, that is a formula we might have to repeat in coming weeks, Phil.
Does any tell you what? We'll throw in a bonus for all our listeners. Can anyone name Mr. Irrelevant from this year?
From 2017?
2017, Mr. Irrelevant.
Go on then, Phil.
Quarterback drafted by the Denver Broncos.
That doesn't narrow it down.
Chad Kelly.
It was Chad Kelly, correct.
The absolute hoodlum that is Chad Kelly. Yeah, no wonder he's not on a team.
No pass attempts in his career. He's played in 1 game, 1 rushing attempt, no yards.
You've done so well, Phil. So well in the last 2 weeks, and then
this feels
Chad Kelly.
Shambolic, but enjoyably shambolic. So, talking of the enjoyably shambolic, let's throw ourselves into our time-changing picks, and ultimately, here's the setup, right? We can go back and change the course of NFL history by switching the end result of a key event or key decision made by a team or player. We know the running order by now. We've been doing this long enough. So, Aldrin, I am coming over to you first.
Well, I think everybody, knowing that I'm an Indianapolis Colts fan, should know that, of course, the play that I would have liked to see instead of the play that happened would be Thomas Morstead rocking up and just firing the kickoff for the second half of the Super Bowl far into the end zone, and as the Indianapolis Colts taking the rest of the game and winning comfortably. But what actually happened was one of the greatest, gutsiest, most ballsy plays coming out of halftime in a Super Bowl, and the New Orleans Saints kicking an onside kick to start the second half.
On onside kick to start the second half, and the ball bounces off the hands of a Colt, and it looked like the Saints had it for a second. We got it. We got it.
Recovering said onside kick and then going on to beat the Indianapolis Colts. So the play that I would much rather have back is them to not have decided to do that, to have been much more reserved and just kick off like normal, and us continue to march down the field and win the game as we probably should have, because that year we were absolutely lights out unstoppable. We were 10-6 up going into the half, and that ultimately changed the course of that Super Bowl, and we would have had another Super Bowl ring. So
I love the sound of disappointment in your voice from
It's so annoying.
every line of that.
I'm sat and just thinking that in at times like this is like, oh yeah, I'd love to have something do over. I'd love my friend's team to do well. You want that success. You'd love a Manning to have another Super Bowl. That, but at the same time, I'm sat thinking I can't root against something that they codenamed ambush, and that was what they called at halftime. I'm sorry, Aldrin. I would love this to not have happened, but just so good.
I know. And do you know what? I was reading up on it today, and some of the funny stories about how they came to that play. And at half time, Thomas Morstead was out practicing kicks, and he was chatting to Pat McAfee, and he apparently said to McAfee, they might as well not even be bothering in the back of the end zone. I'm going to kick it out of the stadium. And then obviously he lines up, kicks it 10 yards. It was, it's such a gutsy play. And I mean, you have to give it to them because it really changed the course of that game. I think we were pretty comfortably, we went 10 up, and they kind of clawed their way back into it with a couple of field goals. Ultimately, we were so good that year. So good. Peyton Manning was amazing. Certainly at that time, everybody did everything they could to kind of take a possession off Peyton Manning. You ultimately didn't want to give him the ball because it was more than likely going to end up in the end zone. And they did a great job. But yeah, to have that moment back, to make it a routine Super Bowl win would have been quite nice. But they never are routine, are they? So.
I mean, so many great things here. I mean, we've just spent really the last year talking about, Drew Brees only won, that one Super Bowl. And this is the Super Bowl we're talking about. This is, in another version of history, as close as Drew Brees would have ever got without lifting the Lombardi. But I think you're right, Aldrin. Firstly, how many onside kicks are actually successful? So let's start there. I mean, there's calling it and there's executing it is the other thing. But the thing I remember most is, like you say, and on the one hand, it was the Colts 10-6 up, and they're about to start the second half with the ball in Peyton Manning's hands. Everything kind of felt under control. And then it was the play that just gave the Colts that bloody nose that they never recovered from. I mean, they never settled again after that, did they? I mean, the second half was disjointed. It was one of those things where, you look back at that coaching staff and actually the way that they've played really ever since, they really do play with that chip on their shoulder. And when they have historically, I think they've always been at their best. The Colts have had Super Bowl wins before. The Saints had never come even close, had they? And isn't it amazing actually that their one moment, their one bit of time in the sun is just so poetic and so memorable.
I think it comes down to aggressive play calling, but I think it comes down to what makes the NFL great sometimes is knowing that you've got to put it all on the line for a single moment that can change the course of a game or a season. And you see that so often, even in the last few years. You've seen Mahomes falling over, making an incredible throw down the field, and it's those kind of individual moments that can change the tide in a game. And like you said, it really did.
Well, yeah, I think Rob's right, because again, you're talking about it being the play that kind of gives the Colts the bloody nose. And when you think about that second half performance from the Saints, at least when I do, the two things I always think about are the onside kick, one, and then I think it's the Tracy Porter interception as two. And you kind of have to look, if we're looking at this kind of, butterfly effect, spider's web from a change, if the Saints are already further behind, they've not got that aggression. They've not got that need and that kind of thing of, you remember Sean Payton wandering the sidelines, asking who's going to be a ball out hero. They need a turnover. You're not going to have that if they've already just fallen further behind. It's kind of going to be even more desperate. And from there, you kind of look to, like, again, kind of like Rob hinted at, as kind of where you go in the future from that. Is Drew Brees considered the caliber of quarterback that he is without having that Super Bowl on his resume?
It's a great moment, because the thing about the NFL that differs from so many other sports, although, many American sports go this way, you compare the Super Bowl to NBA, NHL, and even these American sports that have this kind of knockout system rather than a league system. None of them come down to one game outside of the NFL. It is one game, it's one moment, it's 60 minutes of playing time. And the thing is, one team gets to go to the White House and 31 teams watch it on TV. It's that thing. It's a league that produces one winner and 31 losers in a sense. And for the Saints to have that moment off the back of such a performance, I think I think it's going to be part of the NFL folklore for many, many years from now, and a game that people not only talk about. I mean, how far beyond it now are we? Probably 15 years, I suppose. We blinked and we're
it was
quite a good way past it.
2009-10, wasn't it?
So I mean,
we're 11 years on.
11 years on, and you add another 10 or 20 years to that, there'll still be people, like us, that remember sitting up and watching that game and just being absolutely mesmerized by that second half. So JB, your turn.
So I am also looking back at a potentially pivotal moment in my team's history, of course, looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we are going all the way back to April the 26th, 1983, where with the 21st pick in the first round of the draft, the Steelers picked Gabe Rivera as a defensive tackle, because Chuck Noll was in the middle of starting a rebuild. And much like he'd done with picking Mean Joe Green and kind of the Steelers that dominated the 70s, he wanted a big defensive presence to help the Steelers continue now to dominate into the 80s. The fairest thing is to say it didn't really work out. Rivera, in the games that he played, came along slowly but started to show promise. And unfortunately, there was the accident that he was involved in that ended his playing career. In picking Rivera, the Steelers decided not to pick the man born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the man who graduated from Central Catholic High School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the man who graduated from Pittsburgh University, the greatest quarterback to never win the Super Bowl, Daniel Constantine Marino Jr.
Miami Dolphins first round selection. The Dolphins select quarterback Dan Marino of Pittsburgh.
83 was Terry Bradshaw's last year. What would the 80s have looked like for the Steelers if they had Dan Marino throwing passes instead of the sort of the litany of not quite as good as it was? How would it have changed kind of the Miami Dolphins as an organization? Because, Marino only got to one Super Bowl and he never won it, but the Dolphins were still successful. Marino himself was still successful. Would Marino have been that good with the Steelers? Would Dan Marino kind of be the icon? He wouldn't be an Ace Ventura. They'd have, like, I don't know. I mean, it could be Brett Favre. The Dolphins could have picked him up by then, and that would have been a completely different thing.
I have a number of problems. Firstly, I don't mind you spoiling, when you change history, spoiling Ace Ventura, but don't then make a change that also then spoils the Something About Mary. You've just got to leave some of these films untouched, right? So the Brett Favre thing, I'm not going to allow to fly at all. Dan Marino is a strange one, isn't it? Because, like you say, he never won a Super Bowl. And before probably the modern era of quarterback, probably that I'm going to kick off, let's say Brett Favre kicks off what I consider the modern era of quarterback. Dan Marino was probably regarded by many to be the greatest of all time. We're talking about a guy, he didn't have Montana's Super Bowl wins and so on and so forth, but people hold Marino even to this day in that kind of regard. So Marino had some great wide receivers in Miami. So Mark Duper and Mark Clayton probably are the two that immediately spring to mind. But are you suggesting that Marino on another team wins a Super Bowl? Or do you think Marino was on a great team and it was Marino who maybe should have got himself over the line? Marino who never quite grabbed those chances when they came along. And there were many playoff chances. That one Super Bowl chance in his second season from memory. What do you think? Is it Marino ended up on the wrong team or Marino himself was the problem?
I think it was probably just Marino being on the wrong team. I think it's all of those pieces not necessarily lining up. I think the thing with Marino and the Steelers is also players want to go and play for a successful team. They want to play for a winning team, and they want to play for players and for a team that you think are going to do well. Listing off all of the places in Pittsburgh that Dan Marino lived and graduated from is kind of also to illustrate the point of that man would have been a cult, not even a folk, a cult hero there. If he was even halfway as successful as he actually turned out being at the Dolphins. I think the Steelers could have respectively dined out on Marino in the same way kind of you used to have all of those fans that would be there cheering for Franco Harris and the like back in the 70s.
I do think it would have been fascinating to see, wouldn't it? I think it's one of those situations though that seems so obvious when you look back on it now. It's like, well, why wouldn't you pick Dan Marino? Look what you pointed out at the start, hometown guy, would have slotted in, probably would have, run through a brick wall for that team being his hometown team.
See, I just have this whole Marino played under arguably two of the greatest head coaches in NFL history. I mean, you've got Don Shula, the only head coach to ever coach a perfect season. And then at the end of his career at the Dolphins was under Johnson after he'd left the Cowboys. Have I got that right? We're going back into the vault here, aren't we? A guy who, again, won a number of Super Bowls with Dallas and achieved great things. I don't know. I mean, it's
yes. If he played in Pittsburgh, all he would have done is play under 4-time Super Bowl winning coach Chuck Noll.
No, but this is my point, right? That Marino played under great people and didn't win a Super Bowl. So look, he makes the Steelers better because the Steelers spent part of the 80s and 90s with like Bubby Brister at quarterback. I mean, you ended up with journeyman quarterbacks for a period of time. I think he makes the Steelers better. What I'm really trying to get to is there really a team that you put Marino on, other than maybe the 49ers in that era, and you go, yeah, he wins a Super Bowl with that team? Because I think he had a lot of things going in the right direction in Miami, and yet it just didn't quite happen, did it? Never quite got there. So with that, PB, what piece of NFL history would you change and why, sir? Just be gentle, because NFL history has been pretty bloody kind to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Well, I'm not actually picking the Buccaneers.
So don't get too selfish, right? I'll tell you what I'd wish. I wish that we hired the greatest quarterback of all time, and in coming to our team, he won a Super Bowl in his first season. That kind of nonsense just isn't going to fly.
Well, I'd change him, obviously, coming to us about 20 years earlier, but there we go. No, I'm actually not picking that one, but it does involve Mr. Greatest of all time, Tom Brady. And I will take us back to February the 1st, 2015. And we're down 26 seconds left in the game on the 1-yard line. The Patriots are winning 28-24. And you think, well, give it to Beast Mode. Just give it to Marshawn, put it in his hands. Another Super Bowl, 2 in a row for Seattle. Dynasty on the way. Why is he faking it? Where's that pass go? Oh, he's throwing it. Oh, he's throwing a pick. Russell Wilson throwing it into Malcolm Butler's hands.
Play clock at 5. Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal.
Does Seattle reign supreme? Are they now the team that everybody wants to beat and the team that everybody wants to go to in the NFL? Because they'd have won 2 in a row. I'm pretty certain that Pete Carroll and every single member of the playing and coaching staff of the Seattle Seahawks wish they could go back in time and change that one moment.
The thing I love about your choice, Phil, is compared to the previous 2, this is by far the most obvious because you go, what happens if they don't throw the ball? And the answer is they win the Super Bowl.
Exactly.
They have 3 attempts to run the ball in from the 1-yard line with the best short yardage running back of his generation, maybe ever.
In a game where the Patriots had not once stopped him. He had literally run roughshod through that line.
Yeah.
At will. And then it's one of those situations where you do just scream at the TV, run the damn ball.
Yeah. There's a great moment in the Americas game, though, isn't there, where Russell Wilson runs over to the sideline and he says, I think he says to Pete Carroll, He goes, what just happened? And Pete Carroll's response is, that guy just made a play. And Malcolm Butler, I mean, obviously, Arizona Cardinals superstar cornerback Malcolm Butler just like the Thomas Morstead, in the biggest moment, in the biggest game of his career, he enjoyed the biggest moment of his life. It's that much, you say the words Malcolm Butler, he is synonymous with that one interception, whatever he goes on to achieve. I think that'll absolutely be what he's remembered for. And like Morstead, good for him.
Addendum though to the Malcolm Butler. But yeah, the other synonymous Super Bowl moment with Malcolm Butler is the famous Philly Super Bowl where he didn't play a snap, or he played one special team snap, and nobody still knows why, having had such a massive impact on the, on this Super Bowl where he effectively won the game for them, to go, was it 2 years later? 3 years later maybe, and then not even get a snap apart from the one special team snap just to show he was healthy. There's, really, really, really odd. So I suppose that if you're changing one of them, that's on the Patriots side, that's probably the one you want to change, to think if we made Malcolm Butler active, he was one of our top cornerbacks, then what happens to that Super Bowl? Because that was an absolute gunslinging Super Bowl, wasn't it? One of, if not the highest scoring Super Bowl of all time. Does it change if you add another defensive playmaker into the mix?
You can never count out the Patriots, because we've seen this too many times. The odds are against us, and it all looks grim, and somehow Bill Belichick and Tom Brady find a way. And that Malcolm Butler interception fed into all of that, into that kind of league and fan-wide just acceptance of the fact that, the NFL is a season of 17 weeks with 32 teams, and at the end of it, the New England Patriots win the Super Bowl. It is what everybody thought happened. And if you take that away, it's kind of like, well, what happens after that? Who becomes? Every time we talk about this, I still have in my mind that image they caught on the sideline of Richard Sherman, who's got such a perfect look of surprise and absolute horror. Like, he cannot believe what's just happened. And you have to think a part of that decision not to run the ball led into kind of the disintegration of that Seahawks team. They looked so dominant. And I think you started to hear of problems with Sherman, problems with Earl Thomas. Cam Chancellor got injured. Cliff Averill, I think, got injured as well. Michael Bennett, he fell out of favor. And everybody started to talk about, Pete Carroll, he's got a soft spot for Russell Wilson. And that seemed to be the biggest indicator of that being true, because with the game on the line, the argument can be made, instead of trying to win the game, Pete Carroll put it in the hands of Russell Wilson. He, before it was cool, let Russ cook. How different are the Seahawks after this? How different are the Patriots after this? Do we get into let Russ cook and the Seahawks eventually drafting Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf? Or do they stick to that run the ball philosophy, and we never truly unlock what is great about Russell Wilson?
Do you know, for me, the interesting bit is I almost think you stop the clock. If we're playing with time, let's do it, right? You're saying what would have happened to the Seahawks if they'd have won that Super Bowl. If they'd have won that Super Bowl, teams that win back-to-back Super Bowls, for me, are written into NFL history as some of the greatest teams of all time. So those Elway Bronco teams, and oddly, Elway's Broncos denied Favre's Packers of the similar accolade of two back-to-back Super Bowls. You look at when teams like the Cowboys have done it. I know the Patriots have somewhat changed, what we ever thought might be possible in the NFL in terms of one team's domination. But you look at those 49ers teams and so on. I think to win back-to-back Super Bowls is such a remarkable thing in this league that actually forget where they'd have gone. I think that Seahawks core would have been just remembered forever as for that period of time being dominant. And what cost them that? What cost them that immortality in NFL terms? Not giving the ball to Marshawn Lynch in the 1 yard line with 27 seconds to go. I mean, it's just, you can say it more and more. I mean, the Falcons Matt Ryan play, you kind of look back and go, oh, if they get that first down, there's no way the Patriots come back from 28-3. But I mean, this is different. This is literally, there are seconds left on the clock and the ball is in your hands. It's just the most remarkable thing. I would love to know what the whole Malcolm Butler thing was, though. against the Eagles? Do you think we'll ever know? Do you think Bill's got a book in him? I think he's got to have, hasn't he?
No, absolutely not.
Strike me as the book kind of type.
Like Bill Belichick strikes me as the kind of guy that he will retire from football and just disappear, and you'll never see or hear from him ever again.
Do you not just think, though, in his final moments, he'll hand a note to his family and they'll just open it and unfold it and it'll say he missed a practice or something? Do you not think one day, some way, we'll get the answer to that? Because like you say, Malcolm Butler, yeah, I would love the answer to that mystery. So we're rolling around to me, I think. So in terms of mine, I'm going to pick a moment that I think has everything to do with Super Bowls, but from a team who've never won it. In 1991, if you were to look at the roster of the Atlanta Falcons, on offense, they had in their depth chart a quarterback called Brett Favre.
Selected by Atlanta as the 33rd overall pick in the 1991 draft and signed to a 3-year, $1.5 million contract, Favre soon impressed his teammates and coaches with his primary weapon.
He had the strongest arm I'd ever seen in a quarterback. He could literally throw the ball 100 yards.
And on defense, they had Deion Sanders. Guys who not only went on to win Super Bowls, we're talking about people who were in league MVP conversations, defensive player of the year, offensive player of the year, and also players with lengthy careers. I mean, Favre played to 2007. Deion Sanders retired, 4 years before? But in 1991, the Atlanta Falcons had the golden ticket on offense and defense sitting on their roster. And then what happens? The 92 season, Brett Favre lines up as a Green Bay Packer, and the rest is truly Packers history. Deion Sanders lasts barely longer than his short-term teammate before he winds up having success, obviously not only with the Cowboys, but with the 49ers in his career, with the Ravens and so on. So my moment in history is, could someone just go back and grab the Falcons by the scruff of the neck and say, history's beckoning? Two of the greatest of all time were sitting there ready to lift at Lombardi, and yet the Falcons never even came close. One dismal showing in a Super Bowl in the 90s, probably the most infamous collapse in Super Bowl history, the best part of 20 years later. How different the world could have been if they'd have kept those players on a relatively talented and competitive roster elsewhere. I just feel for that fan base that trophy has never yet found its way back to Georgia.
It's so fascinating if you think, what if Favre never went to the Packers, and how does that affect the whole future of that franchise? Do they win the Super Bowls? Do they draft Aaron Rodgers? And, how does that all hang together? Such a missed opportunity, isn't it, where they could have had these two absolute world beaters to build a team around, and it just never quite happened. And
I mean, I guess my point really is, so often when you do this change the course of history stuff, a bit like your point, JB, it's one thing to say they had a draft pick with this generational talent still on the board. The Atlanta Falcons had these guys in the building. Are you telling me that nobody in that organization looks at defensive back Deion Sanders and goes, this guy's going to be special? I mean, he was special for the Falcons. I mean, Favre's a bit of a different case because Favre never really got his chance. But Sanders was incredible, and you let the guy walk away. I mean, you go to watch a Falcons game now, whether in Georgia or we're lucky enough to be doing it in London this year, you will see Falcons fans with Deion Sanders jerseys on their backs, right? And they let that talent walk out. And that, for me, is a whole different thing. That's not a, we didn't draft a guy who was still on the board conversation. This is, they were there. They were in our locker room. They were wearing our jerseys, and we let them go. And that, for me, is just how many NFL franchises in the history of the league have something like that staring them in the face. I mean, Favre was, 3-time league MVP? I am going off the top of my head, so apologies if I'm one up or one down. But I mean, Favre is not good. I mean, he set the standard for the position. Generational talent, a phrase we use a lot. And Sanders, I mean, arguably the greatest defensive player of all time, isn't he? I mean, he's in the mix. I mean, you can put players amongst the Deion Sanders type conversation, but I don't think you can make a really straightforward argument that says Sanders doesn't deserve to have that level of recognition. They were in the building, and that I just find unreal.
Well, I think the key thing when we're talking about it is, the Packers took Favre and working with Mike Holmgren and all kind of like breaking him into the quarterback that he eventually became, that kind of that league setter as it was. You look at, what could have been, and was it just Favre in the right place at the right time? Whereas with Deion Sanders, he went to the San Francisco 49ers and they won the Super Bowl, and then he went to the Dallas Cowboys and they won the Super Bowl. And yes, we're talking about a player going to two of the best franchises in that period of time, two of the best of the 90s. But he still won the Super Bowl with them. The Cowboys rightly identified after missing out in 94 that Sanders was the piece that they needed. So they went and got him, and shockingly, they won the Super Bowl again. So I do kind of agree. You just look and think what could have been for a team and a franchise that is kind of one of those that you look and think, well, they've played in the Super Bowl, they've never won the Super Bowl, and you kind of think, well, why?
I mean, I have a hard time feeling sorry for a team I get it, they're a divisional rival, but I have a hard time feeling sorry for a team not having won a Super Bowl when they were 28-3 up in a Super Bowl. Like, if you let a 28-3 lead slip in the biggest game of the year, you've only got yourselves to blame. And, I don't think you can feel sorry for a team not having won one when they made that, monumental collapse.
But I think it's the difference for me between feeling sorry for a team and feeling sorry for a fan base. I mean, there's one of these things where you look at teams that haven't won the Super Bowl. So you take the Cleveland Browns. Well, the Cleveland Browns have been hapless at times. The Arizona Cardinals, or the Phoenix or St. Louis Cardinals before. Pretty average for the vast majority of those franchises' histories. Whereas the Falcons, I mean, you're just giving stuff away. I mean, that for me, 28-3, we've talked about onside kicks and all sorts. We will never see something like that again in our lifetime, will we? I mean, that is, for me, still one of the most extraordinary sporting events. I think that transcends the NFL even in how utterly extraordinary it is. Falcons fans, I feel the pain of having never won a Super Bowl. But yeah, that must really, really grind a few people's gears. So JB, round us out with your final selection for bits of history you want changed.
So I did come in with two here. And obviously, because I love history and I love linking things together, this also sits on April the 26th, 1983, and ultimately will undo four of the most well-known words, I think, in NFL lore. This one's for John. We're, of course, talking about the fact that John Elway drafted first by the Baltimore Colts in 1983 after having made it plainly obvious he would never play for the Baltimore Colts ever. And it's not just what would have happened if he would have stayed with the Colts instead of going to the Broncos. It's the bigger question of what if Elway had just gone to play baseball in general. And when we're talking about kind of the decades of impact this would have, that means obviously no Elway at the Broncos, which means no drive and no fumble. How would that impact how we consider the Cleveland Browns now? Because ultimately, if the Broncos aren't in that game and the drive and the fumble doesn't happen, the Browns could have won those AFC Championship games. The Browns would have Super Bowl appearances, potentially even a Super Bowl win. And all of a sudden, we're not talking about the ridiculous Browns of these days. Potentially, we're not even talking about a Baltimore Ravens team, because the Browns had won the Super Bowl. The Browns may have stayed in Cleveland for the entire time, and the Ravens just don't exist. We're not talking about the two Super Bowls that Elway won with the Broncos. Rob's already mentioned when we were talking about the Falcons about how they stopped Brett Favre from having two. And it finally kind of ends with, does Peyton Manning go to the Broncos and win a Super Bowl there? Because it was John Elway's pitch that took him to Denver. If Elway's not there, does Manning potentially retire? Does Manning end up with Rob's Arizona Cardinals and we're looking at a completely different Cardinals franchise?
I like the sound of the last bit. Although, to be fair, the Cardinals did go really big on Peyton Manning when he was available, but we ended up with Carson Palmer. I can't quite necessarily say that that's a dreadful ending. There's probably a version of this podcast where I could talk about his injury when we were 11-1, 11-2, or something like that year, that first real competitive year under Arians. But yeah, I think the Broncos story and actually just stories of quarterbacks refusing to play for teams. I mean, it's happened a few times in NFL history, but it's probably got slightly less, over recent years. If we'd have had a quarterback, say, in this year's draft, refuse to play for a team, and I'm probably thinking about Fields going to the Bears, maybe probably being the one that, outside looking in as a simple fan, you might say was possible. I don't know. I think that would feel seismic today. And you just wonder, how seismic was it? You look back on Eli Manning and probably Elway as the two examples I've got, and you think, yeah, those are really big shifts in NFL storylines that, like you say, run for decades when we're talking about quarterbacks. It's funny. I mean, if a quarterback really said that now, I refuse to play for franchise A, B, or C, would their character be questioned? Would they slide as a result? I mean, there are so many factors.
That's the thing for me, is that, you take him out of the equation, it changes the whole dynamic of the Broncos franchise to start with. Like you say, not only their quarterback situation for those years that he was there, but also their current situation. And
I think if Elway doesn't go to the Broncos, then the Broncos don't have so much of a quarterback legacy to live up to, don't they? And I think that's the problem. They're always looking for the next Elway, or I suppose they got Manning, but as a free agent signing, I don't necessarily think he's the one that they want the next Manning. Do you know what I mean? Elway's their main guy. He's in the in the front office. All right, he's not the GM making the decisions now, but he's still there, kind of lingering about. His presence is in the building. So, if he never goes there, that's not there, and you wonder kind of what happens. But also, I think on your point, Rob, I don't ever see it happening again where someone will refuse to play for the team he's picked for, because I just think, like, if there's a team, if someone's got the number one pick, take Trevor Lawrence this year, if he said, I'm not going to play for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I don't think they'd have signed him. I don't think they'd have drafted him. I think they'd have, potentially tried to trade out of the first spot and get as much as they could for it, and then take one of those other quarterbacks that's available. So, I just don't see, like we talked about earlier, not seeing the 28-3 again, and not seeing the onside kick, ever happening again. I don't think we'll see a player hold out again.
Just as a last point then, on Rob and Phil's points of, do you ever think we'll get to an Elway situation where somebody refuses to play for a team and forces their way out? I think we're getting to the point where that's more likely than ever. I think you've seen the last year or two a real shift in the mentality, particularly of quarterbacks, the mentality of how they perceive themselves within an organization and how much sway they want to have. I think you look at Rodgers, Watson, Wilson, the last couple of years, these are quarterbacks that are making demands of an organization that quarterbacks or any player from any position would never have made in the past. You talk about the Elways and the Mannings. Those were real outliers in an organization where you just went along with the team that drafted you and did what you were told and kept your head down. Whereas now I think there's a real shift of players wanting to exert more influence and expecting and demanding, particularly at the quarterback position, that they're involved in decisions. And if they don't get what they perceive that they want, they're quite willing to kick up a stink, regardless of, how that impacts the team, to get their own way. So for me, I think we're closer now to an Elway type situation than we have been for a long, long time.
I think in the draft, it still feels, I don't know, I think you're right. Free agent quarterbacks or established quarterbacks, I think probably are, probably more powerful than GMs in a lot of cases now, aren't they? You look at these power struggles and you think, you can see Rodgers winning out in Green Bay, for example, at the moment. And, Wilson maybe could win out in Seattle and so on. I still think the draft is something different. I mean, the draft is there for parity. It's almost like players going against the purpose of the draft in a way. And I do think it's odd. But the thing about Elway that I think makes him the case in point, and maybe not so much Eli Manning, but I think they're probably the top two you think of, is if you say the greatest Denver Bronco of all time, I think 99 people out of 100 say John Elway, right? I think Peyton Manning, Phil makes the point. He was only there for a few years, and actually his best year, they didn't win the Super Bowl, did they? It was that Seattle Seahawks win we've talked about earlier. Whereas if you look at some other players, I don't know, is Eli Manning the greatest New York Giant of all time? I mean, he might get a mention, but I think there's people ahead of him. I think Elway's like Fitzgerald in Arizona, for if I come a bit closer to home, he's that one iconic, franchise player of, how long did he play? I mean, a good part of 2 decades, isn't it? I mean, he went from the very early 80s to the very late 90s, I guess. And I think that does make him a very interesting case. But JB, a really nice choice. So we may revisit this again in the quiet weeks that lead us to the NFL season. But thank you, gents, for I've no idea what that really was, a complete and absolute education on the history of the NFL, the way it possibly should have been written. And we'll come back in 7 days' time for more misadventure. Phil, your quiz of the week, stellar as always. B+, B+. B.
Yeah, middling.
I'll try and get back to last week's hype next week.
Yeah.
But gents, thank you for your company. See you again in 7 days for more of the same.
Stay safe.
Bye.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game is over. The game is over.
Eulogy, for lack of a better word. He's not dead. Still very much alive. Signed for a team this year. Maybe cut that out.